The sight of smoke rising over Emmerdale Farm was supposed to signal another step forward in the hunt for the mysterious arsonist. Instead, it became the beginning of something far more personal. For weeks, a string of suspicious fires has unsettled the village. Robert Sugden and Aaron Dingle have struggled to identify the culprit responsible for targeting barns and property across their land. The only clue they managed to uncover was surprisingly limited. The person behind the incidents regularly wore a dark jumper. Viewers already know what many characters do not. Kyle Winchester has been revealed as the individual responsible for the fires. What initially appeared to be reckless vandalism is now developing into a much more complex storyline, one that appears deeply connected to the emotional fallout his family has endured throughout the year. That hidden truth remains safely buried until another fire changed everything. The trouble began when Kyle decided to skip school. Rather than attending classes, he chose to spend time working on the vintage Golf that Cain Dingle had gifted him. To Kyle, the car represented freedom and connection. To Cain, however, it was rapidly becoming a distraction from responsibilities that could not be ignored. When Cain discovered Kyle hiding in a barn instead of being at school, frustration quickly took over. Speaking openly about his son's behavior, Cain expressed regret about giving him the vehicle in the first place. Unfortunately, Kyle overheard those comments. What Cain likely intended as criticism of the situation was interpreted very differently by his son. Kyle became convinced that his father no longer enjoyed spending time with him. It was a small misunderstanding on the surface, but one that reveals a recurring pattern in the character's recent behavior. And that emotional misunderstanding appears to be exactly what pushed events toward disaster. Elsewhere, Graham Foster continued his own investigation. Armed with binoculars and determination, he patrolled the land searching for any sign of the fire starter. What he eventually spotted was not a suspect running away, but smoke rising in the distance. Rushing toward the scene, Graham discovered something unexpected. Kyle was standing beside his vintage Golf, which had already been engulfed by flames. The image immediately transformed what had been a mystery story into something much more dangerous. This was no longer about damaged property. Kyle had placed himself directly beside a burning vehicle, putting his own life at risk. Graham acted quickly, pulling Kyle away from danger before the situation could become even worse. Yet the most revealing moments were still to come. When Moira Dingle arrived after noticing the smoke herself, Graham made a surprising decision. Rather than exposing Kyle, he protected him. He concealed what he knew and drove away with the teenager sitting quietly in the back of the car. That choice suggests Graham recognized something that others have yet to fully understand. Along a quiet road, Graham confronted Kyle about the seriousness of what had happened. But instead of delivering a simple lecture, he did something far more significant. He opened a door into one of the darkest chapters of his own life. Longtime viewers will remember the devastating tragedy that continues to haunt Graham Foster. Back in 2018, after drinking at the pub, Graham drove his pregnant wife Cheryl home. During the journey, he lost control of the vehicle and crashed into a tree. What happened next remains one of the defining moments of his story. Instead of contacting emergency services immediately, Graham called Kim Tate. Before help could arrive, the vehicle exploded, killing both Cheryl and their unborn child. Years later, the memory clearly remains as painful as ever. The burning Golf forced Graham to relive those events in real time. Yet rather than retreating into his own trauma, he used it as a way to reach Kyle. This scene represents an important shift in the narrative because Graham is no longer functioning purely as an observer. He is becoming an active influence on Kyle's future, and that may be exactly what the troubled teenager needs. What makes this storyline particularly compelling is that Graham does not excuse Kyle's behavior. He understands it. His explanation suggests he sees a direct connection between the fires and the emotional turbulence surrounding Kyle's family life. The arson is not being presented as random cruelty. Instead, it appears to be a destructive response to confusion, frustration, and unresolved feelings. That distinction matters because it changes the question at the heart of the story. The issue is no longer simply whether Kyle started the fires. The audience already knows he did. The real question is whether he can accept responsibility before the consequences become irreversible. Graham makes his position clear. He tells Kyle that if he cannot confess to Cain and Moira himself, then Graham will do it for him. It is a pivotal ultimatum, and one that places enormous pressure on the young character. Yet when Kyle finally returns home, the truth remains trapped inside him. Faced with the opportunity to come clean, he cannot bring himself to admit that he is responsible for the destruction of his own car. The silence continues, and with it, the risk that the situation will spiral even further. That hesitation reveals just how frightened Kyle has become of facing the consequences of his actions. As the week continues, Graham becomes increasingly determined to help him. His decision to sign Kyle up for the cadets suggests a practical attempt to provide structure, discipline, and a sense of direction. Rather than focusing solely on punishment, Graham appears to be searching for a way to rebuild the teenager's confidence and purpose. But whether that intervention arrives in time remains uncertain. Because while Graham now knows the truth, Cain and Moira remain completely unaware of the secret sitting inside their own home. Every day that passes increases the likelihood that the truth will emerge under far less controlled circumstances. And as Emmerdale continues to explore the consequences of Kyle's actions, the biggest threat may no longer be the fires themselves, but the moment his parents finally discover who has been standing at the center of them all along.